Okay, welcome again to Social Distillation, a submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the beat and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. Today we're getting back to Wheel of Time and The Shadow Rising, book 4 in our reread. And one of my favorite sections. I don't know about you.
Yeah, the Perrin buildup is one of the best parts. For I think our audience agrees that books 3 and 4 were the best, and this is part of why.
Yeah.
I think you liked book 4 more than 3. I like 3 more than 4.
I tend to go back and forth. When I'm reading The Dragon Reborn, I tend to think it's the best. And then when I'm reading Shadow Rising, I think it's the best.
Well, since we're talking Perrin and Perrin's the conservative of the group, I've got the books up. CEO Strength Coach, that's a good one. But also Bed of Percustus, which is the downfall of conservatives. They try to fit everything into a box. And Jordan Peterson's Beyond Order, how to have a little chaos so you can not be too rigid. And
that's that last one's a really good Perrin book, really good Perrin example. And we're going to see here kind of right off the bat that he likes to have things very ordered, except not everything is a blacksmith puzzle, which is, a metaphor that he uses frequently, but life isn't like that. There are far too many variables.
And on the front side of this episode, I do want to apologize. I'm going to be we usually kind of free flow and have a good stopping place before we go into spoilers and stuff, but I'm going to kind of be rigid on time because I got a new client in exactly an hour and a half, so I want about a 15-minute prep time.
So I'm hoping we could get through these first 2 chapters. I don't know how else he could have done it, but the one downside to The Shadow Rising is how long between storylines he sometimes goes. So we're starting in chapter 18 into the ways, and
that was the big difference between him and Sanderson. When Sanderson had 2 storylines going, he would very rapidly bounce back and forth.
Yeah, and I think he kind of overcompensates. It goes too far in the other direction. But it is a little much to go from chapter 18 into the ways. So we get 1 chapter of parents setting out, and then we don't get back to it until chapter 27 within the ways. So there's probably a spot here in the middle of Rand's storyline where he could have stuck this chapter in. But I kind of know why he did it. I think is that he wanted to get to kind of a cliffhanger stopping point with Rand, and then go away for a little while, and then come back to kind of, show the results of Rand and Ruhadin. But it is kind of annoying to get this nice setup of Perrin into the ways, and then it kind of, as soon as they walk into the darkness, it's go away and don't come back for a very long time. With the girls, it makes a little more sense, I think, because there's some kind of dead time in their storyline, right? Some stuff that you can kind of skip over, like once you have them on the Wave Dancer and that last scene with Elaine talking to the Windfinder, and then it's just traveling. And so it's like, all right, well, we can skip all that. And then once they get kind of set up in Tanchico, what they're doing, but then it's a lot of what he can just do later, which is summarize how they go about trying to find the Black Ajah. There's not really that kind of dead space stopping point in Perrin's storyline until much later, which he does do. Hunter of Trollocs, I think, is the title. Where after he's rescued people, and then he's going off doing his thing, there's kind of a skip for a little while and then come back and kind of summarize what's happened. But anyway,
where are we starting? What page?
Chapter 18, 295.
Okay. Well, and just summarize where we left off with Perrin. Zareen had tricked Loyal into making a promise, and ogres never break their promises. So she's basically he's forced to bring her along wherever Perrin's going,
Mhm.
but actually as in the lead, not bring her along, but take her in that
She's supposed to
direction.
be in charge. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Perrin, in his stubbornness, says, "Well, I'll just follow a little bit behind." And
Mhm.
we round it out by having Gaul saying, "Hey, I owe you a blood debt, so I'm going with you."
Right.
Anybody else we need to add? Oh, Bane and Chade.
Yeah. That is uh introduced here in these first couple of pages, but I like I find it amusing that you put up Peterson's book there because it opens up with Perrin being very methodical, very planned. He's got this scheme to get away. And we see later from Moraine's perspective, she is keeping tabs on him. And then later she is annoyed that he left, which is it's kind of cold on Moraine's part. We understand that she is very detached and very rational, but she knows what's going on in the Two Rivers.
But also it's the same. She's thinking the same way Perrin would think. She
Mm-hmm,
has this
mm-hmm.
plan, and it better go as planned. And
Yes.
we see again, we bring up the different personalities where Varen is kind of more like Matt, which is
Yes.
why she makes a great complement character here in a minute for Perrin, because Perrin needs that in his life.
She understands, and we're going to find out much later near the very end of the series just to what degree she understands that the pattern can take you in directions that you never imagined, and you have to then adjust. Moraine is very rigid, even though she points out a couple of times along the way, primarily when she's talking to Swan in the Great Hunt, that the uh, the pattern doesn't take into account the plans of women, and so she'd had to adjust her and Swan's original plan, but she's still uh it's one thing
She's
for her
still
to
married to the original plan.
yes,
Yeah.
it's one thing for her to say that to Swan, but she kind of agreed with what the pattern was doing at the end of the Eye of the World, so she was okay with it.
Mhm.
But here she doesn't like what the pattern is doing, and so she does not adjust. And she doesn't she's very slow to recognize that these are three Tavarin, um, and they're all three going to weave their own stories around them.
Well, and it's we've talked about this with social issues. She's like the helicopter parent
Mm,
that, yeah, kidnappings don't happen very often, but it's devastating when it does. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure it doesn't happen.
mhm.
And so she's kind of like that with these three boys. Yeah, the pattern does what it does, but it's so important that I have to make sure it does it in the way I want it to.
Contrasted with Lan, who has a much more kind of realpolitik view of things because he has a long history of life and death.
Life,
That
life not being what you want it to be.
exactly, and uh, as a soldier himself, as someone who was trained this way and then has trained others, he kind of makes this point a couple of times in the Great Hunt, and then even again in the Dragon Reborn, that he's done his best to train Rand and the other two to a lesser extent. Like a father is, he's done what he can to prepare them, but now they're going to have to leave the nest. They're going to have to sink or swim on their own. And that's what Perrin is doing here. Is all right. Time to uh, completely leave Moraine. I kind of mentioned last time we talked about Perrin that there is kind of a setup in the Dragon Reborn of him going his own way, because he's with Moraine the whole time, but he's more and more throughout that whole book, he's pushing back against her,
Mhm.
until ultimately at the end he says no to her. is because she's telling him, all right, you need to leave. You need to get out of here now and go to the tower. And he says no, because he's not going to leave Faile. And then it escalates here to, no, I'm not going to stick close to you. I have to go help my people. And so I'm going to completely leave.
When it's like the two ways we've talked about with Matt and Perrin, and we'll get strictly to Perrin, but just the way you look at the world, there's two ways to look at things in a world of flux. You can try to lay the best made plans, or you can just be ready for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And Perrin is very much the try to lay the best laid plans, and he makes adjustments, but they're really kind of pushing a square peg through the round hole sometimes, like his adjustment in what Zareen did, what Faile did. He's adjusting it, but he's still forcing the issue to get there.
Which is how this chapter ends, which is why I love it. We'll get there in a second. But all right, so the setup here, I love the we get a page and a half of Perrin, talking to Gaul and laying out, we see what his plan was to, secretly get away from Moraine without notice. And then none of it matters because, on 296, halfway down, if she gives me away to Moraine, I vow she'll not sit down for a week. Oh, well, as Gaul says, the girl and the Ogier made no secret of their preparations, Perrin. She has been trying to find the Gleeman and telling everyone she means to travel the ways. She is handy with those knives, Gaul said in a neutral tone. Not handy enough. Not if she's given me away, Perrin hesitated. No company of Aiel. The gallows still waited. So
sorry, I have to interrupt you for a second. This is what my dog brought in to chew on. A big chunk of oak that I use for smoking. And you know what? If he's chewing on this, he's not chewing on something else. Here.
Oh. It's not like he doesn't have chew toys and rawhides and other things, but
you know what? He's picked up a stuffed animal that he just carries around and doesn't chew on. It's like his blankie now. He carries this little stuffed dinosaur around, which is good because if he's got that in his mouth, he doesn't have a book or a phone or this phone is about to go. It's about to die, and all the cracks on it are because he chewed on it. Okay, so back where we were.
So we see, it doesn't say explicitly like it does later, but we see what Perrin's plan is here. He's going to go to the gallows. He knows that in his mind, this is the way to deal with it. Is they want him because he killed White Cloaks. So once they have him, they'll leave the Two Rivers alone because he's on that very logical path, that rather narrow path of this is what has to be done. And so he has this brief fleeting hope that, more Aiel will come and they can help get rid of the White Cloaks and he doesn't have to go to the gallows, but nope, no such luck. I love the, we've kind of talked about him before. Gaul is a great little side character. And I don't think we ever get a perspective from him, but Perrin makes a good outside looking in, especially since we haven't gotten any Aiel perspectives yet. We'll get some later, but they're still kind of an alien culture to us, the reader. And we see that from Perrin's observations of Gaul, not knowing why he acts the way he does and says the things he says. So here, when Perrin tells him that if things go bad, you grab Faile and get her out of there, promise me. And I will do what I can, Perrin, for the blood that I owe you. I will. Gaul sounded doubtful, but Perrin did not think Faile's knives would be enough to stop him. And then we get to why Gaul is doubtful, because Bane and Chad have decided to go along with Faile because they find her fascinating. And more to the point, they find her relationship with Perrin interesting. So for them, this is kind of a lark, kind of an adventure. And
I've been pronouncing it wrong all the time. You're right. Chiad. Emphasis on the chi.
and so we find out a bit about blood feuds and water oaths. And none of which Perrin understands, and none of which we understand yet. But we get you can infer things, and you get a hint of their importance, which is going to be revealed more later, and then much more in the next book, which is almost exclusively about the Aiel.
Well, you talked about him not understanding the Aiel, but there's a section there where the girls don't understand Perrin, and they're actually digging deep with their claws without even knowing it. When they're talking about killing wolves and
yeah. I just flipped over. That was the next section, was Bane talking about wolf skins and him growling. And for a moment, Bane looked on the point of saying something more, but she frowned at his yellow stare and held her peace, not afraid, but suddenly wary. But of course, Faile is not bothered. This puppy is not well housebroken yet, Faile confided to the Aiel women. Because that's her way. We're going to see that she's going to continue to push and push and push.
Well, and we see a lot of growth with her going forward. Not quite yet, but later on, where she learns to read him better too. Right now, she's stern. She's in the point of her life because she's a young woman. What about, is she his age, or is she younger like the other girls?
She's about his age.
About his age, so still late teen.
Mm-hmm.
She's just now learning how to read men from experience. She got a lot of training from her mother, realistically, and interaction with the guys in her family. But out in the real world, where people are different, you have to kind of pick these things up again.
Mm-hmm. We get a little bit of that the next page, 299, down on the bottom, when she kind of drops the show for a second, and rides up to Perrin. And why can you not ask, Perrin? She said softly. You tried to keep me away from where I belong, so now you have to ask. Can such a simple thing be so difficult? Which I think we're getting to. We've talked about before about a lot of the fandom doesn't really like Faile, or didn't like her much to begin with. But as we've talked about, she's growing and she's learning, but she's also not.
Am I frozen to you?
Yeah, your video's frozen, but I can still hear you.
Okay, as long as you can still hear me.
So
now you're
from
frozen.
What?
Now you're frozen.
Oh, fiddlesticks.
Well, I could hear you though.
That's fun.
Let me take a note of, we're about 20 minutes in.
Yeah.
And I'll check the video before I post it. If you can hear us and the video is frozen, we're sorry.
You want to pause it here or just keep going?
Well,
hello.
I couldn't hear you for a second, and now I disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
But you can still hear me?
Yep.
Let's pause it for a second. Let me check my internet connection, because it's obviously on my end. So again, if you're hearing this part, we apologize. We will try to get a good product to you. All right, we're back, hopefully. And sorry for that hiccup. We were talking about Faile.
Yeah, and why she does what she does. And it gave me a second to remember. I can't remember which teacher, professor first introduced me to Sun Tzu's The Art of War and called called it the best relationship guide ever written.
That's by the Hulk over there.
Yeah.
Uh,
So and suddenly
what was it? Wasn't it Ulysses Grant? I was only successful at two
yeah,
things in life: war and marriage.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And also a great horseman. So amusingly enough. Um so he anyway, that thought jumped into my mind when I was thinking about um Faile and what she's doing here. She thinks very tactically. This is a stratagem to her. She's not being mean or bitchy or cruel. This makes perfect sense to her that she knows, she understands what Perrin was doing, but in her mind, and rightly so, to a degree for sure, he was wrong to do it. So now she has to counterattack, and that's what she's doing here. This is a counterattack, to kind of redress what he had done. And when we actually get to the two rivers, we'll see that tactical mind more and more and more, both literally and metaphorically. I like as I said before, I like that we see what Rand does before we actually see the effects of what Rand does before we actually see what Rand does to make this happen. And is this the first time we get that Ta'veren tugging that all the boys, or not all of them, Rand gets it a different way, but Matt and Perrin both later we think a lot about that pull that Rand is pulling. They actually feel like a physical pull.
We get this is the first time we get it in the perspective of one of the Ta'veren's mind. We get a taste of it when Matt keeps making excuses to Tom, because he kind of says the quiet part out loud a couple times. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And when he's talking to Perrin after he hears the rumors about the two rivers, and he can't even say the words that I want to get, and he's got a frog in his throat every time he even tries to say the words. And now we get it much more explicitly from page 300. Rand. Perrin knew it was him. The pull of Ta'veren dragged at him. Two whirlpools in a stream drawing one another. Coughing in the falling dust, he shook his head as hard as he could, straining not to dismount and run back up into the stone. We ride, he shouted while Tremor still shook the fortress. We ride now, Loyal, now. And then he hauls off because he has to. And Faile's going to get mad at this, and he doesn't explain that he had to. Otherwise, he was going to be compelled to get down off his horse and run back to Rand, because Rand is doing something momentous here, a literal fulfillment of prophecy, as we'll find out later. So it's a big effing deal, and I hadn't really thought about that before. It's not just what he's doing with the one power that is causing this little earthquake and this pull on Perrin. He's literally fulfilling a prophecy here that he points out after he does it. And I hadn't really thought about that before, but that's why it's so momentous.
And it's weird because when it comes to the prophecies, it seems like every time he tries to force it, it's something you don't expect. But this is one of the ones that was very cut and dry, and everybody around him was overthinking it. And he's like, no.
Yeah.
This I think is what this means, because it can't be anything else.
Yeah.
And that's where the sheep herder comes in, because a little bit of a simple mind Not simple as in he's simple minded, but education wise, he was more simple at this point because he's just now becoming educated.
Mhm.
That's that novice insight that some people get because they're not set in stone in their ways. You know, I saw this early in my career because I wasn't groomed as a professional, then collegiate athlete. The athlete going up through high school, then collegiate, and then professional. And I've been in this mold. I came in from as a researcher into the athletic world, and I was seeing all these things that people were blind to, and it was frustrating. And I think that's where Rand is now.
Mm.
All these scholars around him, all these Aes Sedai around him, especially Moiraine, they're already set in what they think the prophecies are. Whereas he's reading them and he's like, well, why isn't it just this?
Yeah, because you've got they're baggaged by 3,000 years of commentary
Mm-hmm.
of other people talking about what does this mean. And we saw this in Moraine's chapter in The Great Hunt when she was with the sisters. And we kind of saw the kind of the debate, the back and forth, the different interpretations, and whichever sister it was that was talking at the time, I can't remember. And she was actually closest, and yet she was still quite a ways off of what that above the watchers meant.
Mm-hmm.
And I had, as another thing I hadn't really thought about before, but as you say that, Rand also has a literally unique perspective because he's actually the person of the prophecy. So he's the only one on the inside looking out. Everybody else uh, is on the outside looking in by definition. So
which is a double-edged sword,
yes,
because you do have a perspective that nobody else has, but at the same time, you also have a self-protective bias where
it's all
you see he gets obsessed as we go forward about his blood
yes,
on the mountain, on the rocks. It becomes an obsession to him because, well, shit, we should all share this feeling. We don't want to die.
yes,
you
and we
know
and there's a big difference, and that's pointed out that you know the reason that has such an impact on him is that everybody knows they're going to die, but he knows it for sure and when. Not when exactly, not the exact date, but he
but what
knows
the
that
events are that lead
all
to
these
it. Yeah.
events are eventually going to lead up to this particular point, and his blood on the rocks. He is fated to die, and that was something else that I thought of when you were talking about, you know, Rand's perspective on the prophecies. This is why I like the reread and I like the discussion, because again, this is something I hadn't really thought of before. But pay attention as we go through Rand's storylines. Think back to how he was thinking about the prophecies in the last book and what he was trying to do, to his perspective on them that led him to do what he did to try and fulfill the prophecy about Kalendor and the stone. And now he put a lot of time into reading the prophecies to try and figure out, to help guide him of what's the next step. And we
let
saw a little bit of that already with his conversation with Moiraine.
let's go ahead and shelf that for spoilers
Yeah.
or the Rand section, because we're falling away from Perrin now.
Yes.
And
But I just want to put a pin in that of whether you're reading it for the first time or if you're rereading, pay attention to how Rand's approach to the prophecies change as his personality changes. That's something I hadn't really considered before and is a big effing deal. So we'll talk more about that. But then back to Perrin, who is not saddled with all the baggage that Rand is, and he also has that very simple and direct way of thinking.
well, and realistically, this is a good segue because he, in his mind right now, still is going to his death. He
That's
thinks
a good point.
yeah, he thinks he's going to die where he's going.
There is definitely a parallel here with Perrin and Rand and what he's doing. That's another good thing I'd never thought of, and see the similarities and then the differences in how they act and react to this in their mind, certain doom, certain death.
Well, and this is a difference between Perrin and Rand, because again, remember Rand mentally is halfway between Perrin and Matt, and Rand knows he's going to die, and he's trying to figure out what he can do about it. He obsesses over what he can do about it. Perrin thinks he knows he's going to die, and basically just resigns himself to it, tries to mitigate the damage around it. So, okay, so this is something that's going to happen to me because of something I did.
Yeah.
How do I make it better on everybody else around me? Faile, well, if she's not there, it's going to be better on her.
Yes.
If she doesn't love me anymore, it's going to be better on her.
What you just said, though, is the key difference between him and Rand is Rand very rightly resents his fate, because why was I fated to die like this, to live a short, terrifying, stressful life and then die for the sake of humanity? Why me? But for Perrin, he's willingly going to the gallows, one, because as we said, he's certain that will fix things, but also because he feels that it's justified. He in his mind, he murdered some people, and actions have consequences. He did something that directly led to his what he considers inevitable death, and Rand was just born.
Well, and it shows, yeah, he did something that leads to his death, but it also shows that we're in an arc of his story where he's learning what real justice is. Because all he's thinking about is, I killed these people. He's not thinking of, it was self-defense. It was, I had to do it at that moment, and there's a gray area in there. Yeah. Again, the Beta Precustus fit everything in the box. There's no room for the gray area.
Right. And if you're on a reread here, you'll know that his outlook evolves and changes eventually as about that. And if you're reading the first time, just, you've already seen the evolution. That's one of the reasons I like the Dragon Reborn so much. I like the Shadow Rising because of what happens, but I really like the Dragon Reborn because of how all of the characters evolve, but the young ones at least. We don't see a ton of evolution of Moraine or Lan or any of them, but
it's the nature of
younger characters.
It's the nature of the characters, because this is another thing I hate about, and Scott will probably agree here, hate about the show, is they made them adults.
Yeah.
Because what we get with the books is they're old enough to be effective in the areas that they end up going, but they're also young enough to have a lot of development.
Yes.
Because their prefrontal cortex is still not set in stone. The ladies are typically a little bit younger, and they've got about, in these books, what would you say the span of Eye of the World to the very end is? What, about 5 years?
No, it's less than that. I'm pretty sure it's about 3 years,
because we're about a year and a half in ish. So yeah, it's about somewhere between 3, 4, somewhere under 5 years. So the girl's going from about 16 to 21, and the guy's going from about 18 to 23. That's the biggest moment of development right up in this area here. So everything you learn about mixing in with society and survival in the adult world is happening to these characters now. Lan and Moraine and Varen and all of them have been through that already.
You know what? It's interesting you say that, because here with Perrin, we also have Loyal, who, yes, he's 90 years old, but developmentally,
we're going to have to make an assumption with this mathematical analysis here that his brain develops at the same rate that adults that humans do, like dog years, kind of, so he's at the same age as developmentally as the boy.
Right. So we know from from his scenes, especially in The Great Hunt, when they actually go to the studying, that he's viewed about like how the six young men and women are. So we also have him in that mix, and I don't think it's an accident, because almost nothing is with Jordan, that he is also a youngster, and of kind of a same mentality of uh curiosity and exploration.
Well, it was also essential for the storyline because the Ogier are so conservative.
Mm-hmm.
No adult Ogier would go on this quest to the two rivers because it's so outside of what the set in stone right thing should be to do, which is to stay at the steading or to stay in tier and fix the stone or any of those logical things. You needed someone who was kind of volatile, like a child would be, or a young adolescent would be, realistically, because adolescence, not only do we have this brain development going on, we've got this barrage of hormones where something that's slightly upsetting to me or you is a life-ending event to someone at that age. And that's an adaptive feature because that forces you to grow up. And
you also, so that does two things for the story here.
Trust me, I've got a preteen son, and things are getting that way. So,
oh yeah, have fun.
Yeah.
So, in sharp contrast to the show, and one of the many reasons it sucks is because there's nowhere to go. So, what Jordan gives himself by setting these characters at this developmental age is, one, like you say, there's a development there. We get to see it. It's a more engaging story because we get to see development. It's why I think Elaine is the weakest of those six and least liked, because she's the most stagnant. She's the most set in her ways, in part because the other thing this age does is they give you a fresh perspective because of their youth, but also because of their isolation growing up in the two rivers. And Elaine is the odd one out there.
Yeah, I think it's two-part with her. This ain't a spoiler, but probably more would be better in the spoiler conversation, is you have what you just said, but also realistically, we talk about the top 1% in society and 2% in society. It's an identifying thing too. Nobody really likes the rich bitch, you know. It's like the movie Clueless, you know, you just kind of take the quips and it kind of died away as kind of a genre, realistically, because you just don't identify with it. Well, some people do.
Yeah.
My boy JC, you know him. He'll be like, hey, look, check out this girl I've been talking to. And I'm like, she looks expensive. Just your type.
Yeah. Yeah.
That glass of wine in her hand probably cost more than 3 bottles of what I would buy. Okay, let's try to get to the two rivers, because we've got about 10 minutes till we need to start spoilers. And I really want to get to it because I just listened to a fascinating conversation about the state of art.
Well, I figured we'd come back to it later.
Well, I thought we were going to do other social stuff on the second part 2, because we're going to do part 1, part 2.
Let's see how far we get here.
Well, let's get to the two rivers.
I was figuring we'd do all the talking, and then you'd have to go back to work, and then we could do start up again tonight and do the spoiler section.
Well, I'm also thinking about the length of the episodes, because even with commentary, it's an hour and a half out of somebody's time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, skip to the end of this chapter, and then it ties directly into the beginning of the next chapter, which is one of the reasons I was annoyed that it took so long to get there, page wise.
Which is the next one, page wise?
Page wise, that's 442. So
wow.
304, 305 is the end of this chapter. And as we've talked about, Perrin's not going to play what he considers Faile's game. And to her, it's a game, but not really. It's a strategy. And so but Perrin considers it a game. He considers it juvenile. He's not going to play. So he goes in first, by golly. And I love the interplay between him and Gaul at the end of the chapter here as he goes in first. And Faile is upset with you, Gaul said once he had his lantern alight. She seems to think you have broken some sort of agreement. Bane and Chiad, do not let them get you alone. They mean to teach you a lesson for Faile's sake, and you will not sit on that animal so easily if they managed what they plan. I agree to nothing, Gaul. I do what she's forced me to do through trickery. Blah, blah, blah. And then the do you know what you are doing, Perrin? No, Perrin admitted, but there's no reason for Faile to know that. Gaul laughed. It is fun to be so young, is it not, Perrin?
Well, and remember, let's rewind for a second. Back to when Perrin first told him they were taking the ways.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And his response was, well, we all have to die at some point.
Does this change things? No, just, now I don't expect to make it there.
Which when we talk, what we just brought up with Perrin's, I'm going to die and I'm going to walk into it. Gaul is not the best person to be his sidekick at this point. So it's really good that Faile is along.
It's also interesting that you bring that up because from Perrin's perspective, he finds Gaul's fatalism odd. He finds the whole Aiel people and their fatalism odd, and yet he's doing the exact same thing.
Okay, this may go up later because I'm gonna have to make a meme for this one.
Oh, okay.
The what's his name? The actor with the noose on his neck, and he's looking first time. Yeah, so it's gonna have to have Perrin talking to Gaul. I'll have to think of what I'm gonna say. Perrin talking to Gaul and Gaul looking back first time. Which we actually see later, not a spoiler storyline, but when an Aiel is put to death in the justice system, they just walk up there and smile and take their licks.
Make jokes, literally make jokes walking up to the gallows. All right, so 443, I like the mechanism here of kind of showing in flashback the results of what Gaul was just talking about, that Faile is mad at him. And the results of that. I don't think it's an accident. People get, one of the things I've seen fans complain about on message boards and whatnot is the way Faile treats Perrin, specifically the way she beats him. And we see that here on 443, where she slaps him twice and then punches him in the short ribs, which anyone who's ever done any boxing, that's your go-to body shot to try and literally take someone's breath away.
And if anybody ever gets in a fight with me, I'll tell you my weakness. This side, the short ribs, are a weakness because they've been completely broken before and there's a nubbin and it's not quite what it should be. So if you ever want to beat me up, there's your spot right there. If you don't remember that, your fault.
One of my greatest accomplishments in training in the martial arts, I went back to I'm drawing a blank on his name, our Kempo instructor.
Oh, Reyes?
Yes.
No, Master Leo.
I went back to him one summer from college, and it was just me and him doing some sparring, and we were boxing, just boxing, and I made him grunt. Just that. But I knew I'd gotten a good hit in on those short ribs because he went, I
just remember his little statement about poking people in the eyes.
Yeah. Don't get on his blind side. Anyway.
Like it feels like Jello.
Something to consider about Faile is she doesn't act this way with anyone else. She's not a bully. She's not, a brawler. The only other time we ever see her really try and get physical, except in an actual battle, is with Berylane. It's clear she completely loses her temper. She completely loses her cool because of what Berylane did and then says.
Well, so we talk about this, and I guess this is the difference we bring to the table is we see a little bit of Amber Heard in her. But as we go forward, I'll get why that's different.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody's on a spectrum, and females tend to be further on that end of the spectrum. And you see about a little bit about it because in her mind, as we saw in that case, she's doing it for his own good.
It's also what I was getting at is in her own mind, there's an element of respect here because she knows he can take it. That she doesn't do this with others because one, as you say, she's doing it for his own good in her mind. She cares about him. And two, he's a big hulking dude. He can take some slaps and hits from this, littler woman. He, on the other hand, does not like this because he's the gentle giant. He doesn't like this violence and physicality in the first place.
Well, and it's that age old, it's that the male female relationship kind of thing where sometimes women do something to men because they should be able to take it without being hurt, but at the same time, it doesn't make it right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still abuse to some degree.
Bill Burr's got this great bit. If you want to go find it on not hitting women. What do you mean there's no reason to hit a woman? I can think of a dozen off the top of my head. You just don't. But what do you mean there's no reason to? Which is kind of what we get to here. And I guess why in our modern sensibilities, this would be problematic. But as we find out later, Faile kind of wants it. Giggity.
Well, at the same time, we see a difference. I'll just point out the major difference here is they're in life and death situations here. And she's trying to, what she thinks is righting the ship.
Mm-hmm.
And what we have in modern society is first world problems. And beating the other half over a first world problem is a little different than when you think they're marching to their death and you're trying to slap them into sensibility.
It's similar to what we just talked about with her getting in a fight with Berlane, that she lost her temper. And 443 down on the bottom here, her full armed slap made spots dance in front of his eyes. What did you mean? She practically spat, charging in here like a wild boar. You have no regard, none. So same thing, but even more intense because she cares so much about Perrin, and she's so, he made her worry and scared, charging off into this, for all her talk about trying to find the Gleeman and, making no secret that she was going to travel the ways because it's a great adventure. She's not a dummy. She knows that it's dangerous. I mean, she comes from the borderlands. She knows danger. Mm-hmm. And so she kind of freaked him out and made her lose her cool. But I like his response that he took a slow, deep breath. I asked you before not to do that. Her dark eyes tilted, eyes widened as if he had said something infuriating, because he did in her mind. So infuriating that she slaps him again, and then she punches him, and then she drew back her fist again. With a snarl, he seized her by the scruff of the neck and back to the current time. Well, it was her own fault. It was. He had asked her not to hit him, told her own fault. He was surprised she had not tried to pull one of her knives, though. She seemed to carry as many as Matt. When he literally spanked her bottom because she was being a brat. I like the interchange there. And I've she could get on my nerves sometimes, but I never understood the distaste so many fans had for Faile.
Well, I think Scott was right in, I think it was 2 episodes ago, where he commented like what people were mad about in the Jordan series was, he called it insta love. Mm-hmm. And we'll go into that, I think, in our wrap up to all of this, because it is an important concept, and we got to look at things from the perspective of the times. And there are some biological, psychological bases that would actually justify his his version of this love at first sight a lot of the times, or at least in very little interaction type stuff. And she's definitely in that spot where she's basically drunk on the love. She's crazy on it.
It's a good point. We see that again in a different set, but kind of the same thing. Is this chapter is bookended by two such encounters, because we have the opening scene here where she's all ticked off that he ran into the ways first, and loses her temper, and we see a similar scene where she loses her temper, but it's obviously feigned when she's stitching him up at the end after they leave the ways and had to fight Trollocs and Murdral on their way out. That again, she's upset because she's worried about him, and even though she's still putting on this show, so jump to the end. 452. Faile began unbuttoning his coat. What are you doing? He demanded. Tending your wounds, she snapped back. I'll not have you bleeding to death on me. That would be just like you, to die and leave me the work of bearing you. You have no consideration. Hold still. Thank you, he said quietly, and she looked surprised. Don't know why. But then she... Faile stood fingering the slice in the side of his coat. 2 inches to the right, and he would not have left that island. Stamping his feet in his books, he reached for the coat, and she flung it at him. You needn't think I will sew that up for you. I've done all the sewing for you I mean to. Do you hear me, Perrin Elbyra? I didn't ask. You needn't think it, that's all. So, similar reaction, similar personality, and, heat. She's that kind of animated, emotional person. But kind of in very different circumstances.
Well, there's a little bit there too of she wants to take care of him, but she also wants him to have reminders of his own stupidity.
Yeah.
And a hole in your coat is a reminder that you almost died.
Yeah. Don't make me worry like this again. Even though, again, she's from the Borderlands. She knows all about fighting Trollocs and Murdral. She knows how dangerous they are, and then later she's careful about him, and she doesn't want him to recklessly put himself in danger, but she does know that he's going to have to put himself in danger.
Well, and there's also the fact that she's probably seen this same fight with her dad and mom.
Yeah.
There's probably a little emulation going on there. All right. Do you want to start spoilers now, or?
Yes, because the next chapter, I think we'll save. He sees some things, some odd things in the end of this chapter, but then that really ties into the next chapter, to the Tower of Genji. So we're going to get into the Wolf Dream and some other interesting things here. So let's spend some time focusing on that next time.
Yeah, I think Perrin's going to take a little longer than the girls did. We did them in 2 episodes. Yeah. But this is really where you get the depth of his character.
There are more chapters. It's longer, but it's also meatier. There's more stuff happening. Like we said, a lot of what happens with the girls is more setup for what's going to happen with them in the next book. That's why we didn't spend a ton of time on it.
Whereas here, we pretty much get the meat, and a lot of stuff that happens with Perrin in the next probably 3 or 4 books are just kind of results of the meat.
Yes.
It's him. I'm not gonna. We're in spoilers. Yeah, we're in spoilers. So it's him doing things he basically got set up to do here.
Right.
That aren't as important as the setup. Whereas the girls, everything they set up to do is more important.
Mm-hmm. And it's important stuff to the overall plot, but to Perrin as a character, we've kind of arrived, right?
Yeah.
That he's now this leader he doesn't want to be, but that he's kind of fated to be.
He becomes a piece on the board
Mhm.
after this big setup where he develops the two rivers the way it is going to be.
Well, he was already a piece on the board, but now we see why. We see why
Yeah.
Balsamon was so interested in him, you know.
But I mean, from an interesting discussion standpoint.
Yes.
Yeah. That the only thing I'd add to that is the where it flips is his feud with Slayer. That's where the depth goes after this book.
Mm-hmm.
It pretty much just goes down that route.
Well, that's because that's the continued development of the wolf side of him.
Mm-hmm.
Is the wolf side of him, that development is going to happen now where we saw it at the end of The Dragon Reborn. It's going to pick back up of that wolf development is kind of come from being in the world of dreams and learning from Hopper.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas everything that's happening in the waking world is all kind of leading up to this climax of him becoming him becoming the leader that all three of the boys need to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is one character later on, and again, we're in spoilers. Please stop now if you have not read it all the way through, because we get to the developing Perrin, Faile, and it kind of stagnates. And there's one character I almost feel the most pity for in all of these books is the Aiel man that likes Faile after she's captured.
Mm-hmm.
That
is a depressing storyline.
Yes.
And you're frozen again, by the way.
Am I? Gosh,
yeah.
Darn it.
But at least you're scratching your chin and looking thoughtful. You know, you don't have a derp face, so you have that going for you.
Okay, well, as long as you can still hear me. Spoilers. I wrote down prophecies and Rand.
Mm-hmm.
If we wanted to go further into that.
Now I just kind of wanted to point that out while I was thinking about it, is to keep that in mind of how he acts and reacts there. There is an element of that to Perrin's storyline too, especially because we're here in a few chapters. He's gonna run into Varen, and she has a. I don't know if she has any particular insight into Perrin, and that's why she's there. Hey, there you go again. Yeah, you're all.
Yeah, I had to manually start video again.
Well, it doesn't like your connection or something because you're pretty grainy and herky jerky. It's like you're on dial up. I'm curious.
Does anybody in the audience even remember dial up?
Shut up. So something to put a pin in and keep an eye on with Perrin's storyline as it goes forward here, kind of analogous to Rand and that's better.
It's
whatever
better?
You did there. Yeah.
Okay. I just took it out of HD, so I'm in standard definition.
It's so better that
I won't
way.
be.
I won't see you that clear.
Yeah, I was about to say I wouldn't be as fine, but you know.
I'm wondering if Varen has any particular insight into Perrin's storyline, Perrin's destiny, or if this was just a good logical guess on her part to be in the two rivers.
We've got the other side of the pattern pulling you along, and obviously she's not Ta'Veren, but she's a very important thread.
She's a very important thread, and super duper spoiler here. If you're still here and you haven't read this, go away. You've been warned. She's also Black Ajah.
Mm-hmm.
So she knows from the other side what's going on. And I have to think that part of why she's there in the two rivers is certainly why she says she's in the two rivers. But I suspect that she's so knowledgeable that even if she's not part of the Shadows schemes there's a good bet she found out about it, and that maybe that's why she's there.
Well,
to keep an eye on what the Shadow is doing.
Again,
there.
super duper spoily. We get her confession later,
Yes.
And she's already past the point where she's doing their bidding,
But
but she's trying to reconcile her actions.
but
Because remember,
she's a double agent.
yeah, she's a double agent. And so, yeah, you're probably right. She might have known something was going on there. But we also see in the Great Hunt, she recognizes the importance of the other two boys. And it
Yep.
almost seems like she's the only one that acknowledges that in the main group of people trying to guide them.
And I suspect it's because she was at the Dark Friend Tea Party in the prologue of the Great Hunt.
Oh, she had to have been. She's too
And
important of a
exactly.
person. Yeah.
And they knew that she was going to be close to them, and it makes sense that she
Now
would
I
be
gotta
there.
I gotta read that prologue again to see if he describes the ones with the rings a little bit more, talk about someone that's plump or something like that.
Yeah. Because she would know much more than Sawan and Moraine, who are myopically focused on the prophecies and the dragon. And I can't remember, there's a couple of points later where Moraine actually says, I was so focused on just the dragon that she admits as a failing on her part that she didn't take into account how important it was that 3 Tavarin came from this one village, so close in age and all friends together. But Varen would know how important the others are because she knows how desperately Balsamon wants to find them and either corrupt them or eliminate them.
For time purposes, let's go through the comments real quick.
Okay.
Well, Scott apparently lives in Texas, but he's originally from Oregon. So he responded to what we said. I think he's right here. He say Carradin's main motivation was probably power, to be top dog. And I think without any other evidence of anything else, it probably was the initial thought. And then, oh my God, what did I get myself into?
Which makes sense because he's such an important person in the real world and we see that a number of times through Dark Friends.
Well, and I think you get a hint that he's when he's interacting with y'all, a little bit of jealousy there. He wants to be that guy.
Yeah.
The Seeker is suspicious because of Turok's death and Surat's assuming power. So yeah, there's the motive that makes sense for motive there. And now he does bring up the connection between Ulver and Geidel Kane, that it being just a fan theory. But I thought I remembered somewhere in
I don't know that it's ever confirmed in or out of the books, but I did
but I remember a statement that was supposed to at least keep the flame going with the fans. That was something to the extent of time works differently.
Yes.
In the world of dreams versus the real world.
We're told that a couple of times during the series, is that time works differently.
Now, what that doesn't address is there no overlap? And that's where we get into trouble, because again, we're talking about all possible futures outside of the world of dream, as we've talked about with our quantum theory kind of analysis of this. And so at some point he's alive in every world. So he could still be in the world of dreams and be alive in another world. If there are all possible, it has to be that way if there's all possible realities. So can he be in the world of dreams and be in the real world at the same time? We have to speculate again. But I do think Jordan did kind of push the fans along and keep that conversation going.
Yes.
By saying the things he said about time.
And also, when the horn is sounded again, nobody points out that Geidel Kane isn't there. So nothing that explicit is ever said, but a lot of the heroes are named and described, and he is not one of them.
Wasn't he there the first time in book 2?
Yes. But then
but you're talking about in the last book.
When it's sounded again, he's not there.
Let me do a quick look through Theoryland here. Search.
And Birgit makes the statement that she can feel that she's being pulled, that she's about to be reborn.
Mhm.
So,
But she was always younger too, right?
yes, because when Geidel first disappears from the world of dreams, she makes that statement that that he's always spun out first, and so she knows her time is coming close because he's been spun out.
Well, now we're getting a Sanderson interview here where Sanderson says RJ says that Ulver was too old.
Mm.
But he has been reborn.
Mm. Okay.
So I don't know if that's from the notes or what, but this is an interview with Sanderson. Instead of letting, and see, when I see the Jordan interview questions, he still leaves it like so open.
Yeah, but
because
he liked to mess with the fans on certain things.
yeah, because it's said that she won't be able to interact with him in the normal way after Moghedien ripped Birgit
Yes.
from the world of dreams, but there's an affinity between her and Ulver, and it's not the normal way because he's usually older.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jordan's statements keep pointing in that direction as I'm skimming through these. I think, I don't know, maybe he just loved the banter around that, so he kept it going. But
Well,
Sanderson may have stuff from his notes. But also, yeah. I've seen a lot of Sanderson statements that were assumptions based on Sanderson's mind.
Yes.
And
but we also know from the biggest controversy, theory, question of the entire series that RJ obviously liked to troll the fans sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Because he liked to, especially if something became a really big topic of conversation, like who killed a certain person. He enjoyed that. He said later that he was enjoying that one of the reasons he would not or had not in book or in Q&As more directly answered that question is because he was enjoying the debate and discussion and the consternation so much.
And this is part of the disappointment with the internet right now, because back in our day, this is what the internet was used for.
Yes.
Bantering over fictional novels and showing cat videos. And now you can't get on it without being called a racist or a bigot, some way, shape, or form.
Yes. And now we're misogynist because we were talking about a man spanking a woman. How dare we?
Some girls are into it.
We're gonna find that out about Faile shortly.
Oh my goodness.
That's their dynamic. And okay, you do you.
That's still a conundrum, though. I dated a girl once that wanted some of that kind of stuff, and I think it didn't work out because I refused to hit her, even when she was asking me to. So I think that's ultimately what ended the day. Yikes. Yeah. So I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it, which yay me, I guess.
Well, Faile never crosses over into the crazy. Just
that odd. We know of.
That we know of.
That way he doesn't get super explicit in his
that dynamic is certainly odd. But it never crosses into something just bizarre or excessive or weird. It's a quirky cultural trait.
Well, in that culture, modern time culture, the we'll call it BDSM. There is an element to it where women get off to the strength of men, and she's trying to force him to be strong in the face of her, not just the rest of the world.
Strong. strength in assertiveness more than
and
the
that comes,
physical strength is an element, but it's more about the assertiveness.
but it's also an element of use what you got.
Mm.
And she wants him to be strong, and she knows one of his strengths is his strengths.
Yeah.
And it's an odd dynamic because they don't want to be hurt, but at the same time they want to see you assert that authority at some point, because then you garner some respect.
Yeah, well, she gets madder when he responds to her slap quietly. Calmly, he responds calmly and quietly. And that makes her madder.
Yeah, I get in trouble with that because I do tend to be, this is my mad voice. This is also my normal voice. And so I can see how that irritates people, but I don't have a yell voice. And I can see where she would get pissed at him for that. But at the same time, you can be calm and assertive at the same time. And that's where I think we could actually, in a book of 1,000 pages, we could have used a few more words where he could have used a couple words, maybe a little bit more meekly, or something along those lines to give us a little bit more insight into her mind.
Well, but I think we get that later, especially when Elias comes back in and kind of explains things to Perrin. But even before then, as we see more of their interaction as a couple, that again, as you pointed out, she's still learning about Perrin. So
she's learning about men.
And men in general. Yeah, Perrin in particular and men in general. So I think she does learn later when he is being assertive, and she more willingly accepts that, and it doesn't have to be, a more forceful or physical put down, is when he can just be assertive and firm in his words. What really sets her off is if he ever tries to apologize to her.
This is true, but I just think a few more nuggets to give what's in her head here would have been a little bit
especially
better.
Since we're not going to see them at all in the next book.
True, this is very true. Yeah. And to what you said earlier, why people didn't like her at first, that would have helped people like her, I think.
True.
A little bit more. No, there's the fact that Jordan might not have wanted you to like her at this point.
Yeah, true.
They might have been, he might have wanted you to root for Teen Perrin at this point, because of the dynamic of how everything's working out, where he's got to out manipulate her manipulations. And so we do have kind of a binary fight, even though it's psychological and not physical. So he might have wanted you to be rooting for Teen Perrin at this point, but I don't know.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
who knows?
That's all I got on these first two chapters. I think we can get farther next time because the action really starts to pick up. And so there are some nuggets along the way that we can stop and talk about. And Scott, especially, since he's the only one who comments, but anyone else who's paying attention, if there are any particular points in Perrin's storyline that you want us to focus on, then point those out, and we'll make sure to stop there, because in my mind I have a few points along the way that I want to stop and talk about.
And I want to dig into, as we're gonna meet Varen again. I want to dig into Myril, because she becomes super important at this point, and even more important down the road. So we can start seeing a little bit into her character. There's obviously Slayer, Bornhold, Buyer. We've pretty much covered.
Yeah.
He does Buyer things.
Right.
Basically, going forward, he's a pretty simple character.
He's a simple character because he's so simple minded. He is.
Well, I'm going to use a different word. He's so dogmatic.
Yeah.
So if you know his faith, you know him. Whereas Bornhold's a little different because he's mentally like his father, but he's also traumatized by his father's death and influence from child buyer. So he's a much more complicated character. And then just the reaction of the two rivers folk, I think, is important because that gives you what ultimately is the theme of the strength of Manatharin, the old blood coming through.
Yeah.
But we can go down like a genetic road as we've talked about with other things.
The old blood reinforced by the hardiness of how they have to live.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anything else?
No.
We're gonna do maybe a sexy time with Sam later, or
Yeah, if you got some stuff you want to talk about.
yeah. I wanted to talk about the art conversation I was talking about and how that plays into it, because it actually plays into this, but it really didn't fit into that spoiler section. Basically, if you're upset with the show, you might want to tune in on that conversation a little bit, because that it's relevant. It's not necessary for these conversations, but it's relevant. And then we can do a little bit of the two faces on the Johnny Depp thing, because I can have an analytical, which is I agree with the verdict view, but also we can look at things from her side too.
Yeah.
Which is, I think you're either picking a side if you're an internet personality now, when I'm like, well, we can talk about, we can talk about a lot of other issues. So, all right. Well, if you're Wheel of Time fan, you're not going to come back for the second part. Thanks for listening. We will see you next time. And the glitches in the video, hopefully I can get those all. If you're wondering what I'm talking about with the glitches in the video, that means I did a good job. If you know exactly what they are, well, I did the best I could. Anything else you want to add?
Nope.
All right. See you next time.